The voice, judge presiding.
Thank you. The jurors, I believe, are ready to be brought in and lined up, so we'll remain standing and we can have the jurors brought in.
All right, please.
All rise. They're already rose.
Here's our president, County Clerk.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, good morning, everyone. We're on the record on case CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. We're continuing with evidence today, the state with its case in chief. I'll note the jurors are all present, properly seated, and all have signed their juror affirmation. So the court again extends its appreciation for following the court's instruction each day. We will continue with evidence this morning. Apologies for getting started a little bit late. We took up an evidentiary matter outside the presence of the jury and made a ruling on that. So the court will note the defendant is here present with counsel, the state's here present, and also the prosecutors. And at this time, we concluded with a witness yesterday at the end of the day. So I believe the state intends to call another witness this morning. Who will be examining the witness?
I will be, Your Honor. And based upon your ruling just a moment ago, we changed our witness order. He's coming up and he might just be a minute getting to the courtroom.
Okay, we'll go ahead and wait for the witness to appear. Who will the witness be that's going to be on direct?
Yeah, the state will call Steve Schultz.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wixom.
Do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to just inquire of the witness, Mr. Schultz. Now that you've been placed under oath, there is a order in this case prohibiting witnesses from viewing trial testimony before they testify. I'll note that the trial is being live streamed and also open for public attendance. Mr. Schultz, have you observed or viewed any of the trial testimony in the case?
I've not viewed anything.
Okay, and have you discussed with anyone else the testimony they've given in the case?
No.
Okay, thank you for that affirmation. Mr. Wixom, you can begin your direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Excuse me. Good morning, Mr. Schultz.
Good morning.
Could you please state and spell your full name for the record?
It's Stephen R. Schultz. Stephen Steven RSCHULTZ.
Thank you. And where do you live?
Springville, Utah.
And are you currently retired?
Yes, I am.
When did you retire?
I retired in 2022. Correct. Yeah.
And prior to retiring, what is it that you did for a living?
I worked for 25 years with the state of Utah in the Child Support Enforcement Division. And for the last, well, from 2010 to 2022, I worked for two separate mortuaries in Springville.
And what did you do for the mortuaries?
I was a funeral director, also an embalmer, and
Did you do that for the entire
yes,
approximate 12 years?
yes,
And I want to ask, do you know Chad Daybell?
I do.
How do you know him?
Chad and I were neighbors from when we moved into the ward or into the neighborhood. That was in 2006. I'd purchased my parents' home who'd passed away, and Chad lived 2 doors down from me.
And when you said neighborhood, is that in Springville?
Yes, in Springville.
So approximately how many years did you live as neighbors with Mr. Daybell?
Until they left for Idaho, I believe it was 2015, at the end of the school year.
Approximately 9 years?
Yeah.
And what about the rest of his family? Did you know his wife Tammy?
I did, yes.
And what about his children?
Yes,
How well would you say that you knew the family?
very well. We were neighbors. We attended the same church together. We had many conversations and worked together, both in the funeral industry as well as just basic good neighbors.
Would you consider yourself friends?
Yes.
You just mentioned that you worked together in the industry. What work did Chad do that you're referring to?
Chad worked for I believe both Springville and Spanish Fork cemeteries. He was the sexton. And
And could you just briefly explain what did he do as a sexton? What was his role?
as a sexton, he would take care of the cemetery. He would basically assist us in the funerals when we arrived for a graveside service. He would open and close the graves. Yeah, and so there was a lot of free time that we had to talk and a lot of share stories and stuff while the funeral burial was going on.
Thank you. And I want to draw your attention back to October 19th of 2019. Did you learn of the passing of Tammy Daybell?
I did.
How did you learn that?
The first I'd heard is that Jason William, a neighbor, contacted me and said that Tammy had passed away. And that's the first I'd heard of it. That was on a Saturday.
Did you later hear from Chad Daybell that
I
day?
did, yes. A few hours later, he called me and wanted to know if I would be willing to bring Tammy back home to Springville and take care of the services down here. And I said, be honored to,
Why did you feel that way?
because this is a good family. The Daybells were a solid rock in our community. They in our exact neighborhood, there were 5 members of the same family in that vicinity, and I thought highly of all of them.
You mentioned the name Jason a moment ago.
Yes,
Were you aware, was Chad acquainted with Jason?
I would hope so. He was his brother-in-law.
And why did you contact Jason to come with you?
A lot of times people would like to assist in the funeral services other than just being a silent participant. When there's an opportunity, I like to get the family members involved. And plus, it was a long drive from Springville to Rexburg and back in the same day. And I would really appreciate someone who could also help me drive and do that whole thing. So I asked Jason. He says he would love to do that.
So did you in fact go to Rexburg?
Yes, we did.
What day did you do that?
We did that the following day, Sunday morning, is when we left.
About what time did you arrive in Rexburg?
It was, I want to say 9 or 10, somewhere around that, because we had to. It's a 4.5, 5 hour drive, and yeah, so we arrived about that time.
Where did you first go when you came to Idaho?
We went directly to the house,
Whose house?
to Chad's house, Chad and Tammy's house.
And when you arrived there, who was at the home?
There was obviously, of course, Chad and his oldest son Garth, and his Chad's parents.
Did you talk to Chad?
I did, yeah.
Can you explain to the jury what that conversation was, please?
Basically, I went up to approach him, gave him a hug, and said, "I am so sorry for your loss. This was a devastating blow to him, I'm sure, and as it was for me to know that someone as young as Tammy had passed away."
Did you have a conversation with him about how Tammy had passed?
I did.
What was that conversation?
I just asked him. I says, "What had happened?" And He said that she had been experiencing some difficulty with breathing and she went to bed that night. And then when he woke up at some time during the evening or the morning, I'm not sure when because I wasn't there, that she had she'd passed away. I believe he found her on the floor, and then he called Garth in to help lift his mom back into the bed. And that's what he told me.
Did he say anything to you about conversations that he had had with the coroner?
He did. I asked him who the attending physician was, and he said, "Well, we had the county coroner come, and the county coroner had already been there and left before we arrived." And he said the county coroner said that it appears that she may have died from an embolism, and then yeah, she just like I said, she left after that. I did ask Chad if they were going to do an autopsy, which is usually a case when there's not an attending physician there, but in this case, the county coroner was the person in charge at that point and made the decisions as to that she could go ahead and be embalmed.
Did Chad express to you whether or not he wanted an autopsy?
He did not want an autopsy.
Did he say that in so many words, or how did he express that
That's
to you?
pretty much it. Yeah, he says, I asked him, he says, are they going to do an autopsy to find out? Because, it might be for heredity's sake. Children might want to know how their mother passed away. And so they could, watch for symptoms, signs, stuff like that. But yeah, basically the words were, no, I do not want her to have an autopsy.
What other things do you recall discussing with Chad that morning?
I always come prepared when I'm especially going a long distance like that. Well, I'll bring the booklets that I need. I'll bring a casket book so they can pick out caskets. I try to do all that in the home so they don't have to make a secondary trip into the mortuary to make those arrangements. So most of the arrangements were done by the time we left the place, as far as choosing a casket, choosing a vault, choosing a place where they're going to be buried. Putting together a program was still left open because all things happened very quickly.
When you say very quickly, what do you mean by that?
Quickly meaning that he wanted to have the funeral service as soon as possible. And this was on a Sunday morning. And I said, well, with social media, we need to have word get around so that the people will know, so that you'll have somebody showing up at the funeral. And even announcing in the newspaper, there's deadlines to meet. And so he said he wanted to get this done just as quickly as he could. His words, not mine.
What was his proposed funeral schedule?
He wanted to do it as quickly as he could. I think there was some discussion of even possibly doing it Monday, but that was very quick. We talked about it, and he said, we'll do the viewing on Monday. And we came to a reasonable conclusion that the funeral on Tuesday would probably suffice.
In your experience as a funeral director, would you say that scheduling was in the norm?
No, usually there's a 3-4 day time period between the death and the funeral. Sometimes up to a week. There have been funerals that we've not held for weeks.
And why do you typically at least have 3 or 4 days? What's the reason for that?
The preparation to get things ready for the funeral, like I said, to ascertain information for the death certificates, to get programs together and gathered, letting people know, setting up the church, putting the Relief Society in motion so that they can have the luncheon prepared. It can be done in a few couple of days, but for the most part, just to give them the opportunity.
Did you notice anything about Chad's demeanor and tone when you were interacting with him, planning the funeral arrangements?
When I was there, of course, when I gave him the hug, he was teary, and he just lost his wife. But it just seemed like there was a business-like atmosphere about it, which could be either a person's way of dealing with grief, or it could be, I want to get this thing done and over with. fact, I believe the direct words to me were, I don't want to drag this out. I don't want to drag this whole process out. I says, okay, we'll work hard and try to get it done by Tuesday.
Did he happen to articulate any reasons why he didn't want to drag it out?
No, I just wanted to, I think it was just for, because that's sometimes is a long time to wait, to bury somebody, maybe 3 days, 5 days, 1 week, 10 days, whatever, before the service. He didn't want to have the hoopla of that going on.
So when you finished talking to Chad, making these arrangements, what did you do next?
At that point, when we were all finished with the arrangements, we moved over then to contact the mortician who actually picked Tammy up and did the embalming. It was Flam Funeral Home in Rexburg. I made a phone call to Mr. Flam indicating that we were finished at Chad's house and that we would like to pick Tammy up and bring her back to Springville. And so he left his church meeting that he was in attendance to there, and we met him at the mortuary, his mortuary.
Is that a normal thing when there's a deceased that needs to go to another state? Do you normally contact a local mortuary?
Yes, we call that a trade embalming, where they will do the first call when they get the first notification of death. They will go ahead and embalm and then prepare whatever they need to, and then they contact the family will then contact a mortuary to come in, and whoever's going to be doing the service, which in this case was Chad, and he called me directly.
And I'm just gonna ask the witness, could you slow down a bit?
Sure.
Our court reporter, you're talking pretty quickly. It's fine. You're articulate, but for the reporter's sake, if we could just slow down
Okay.
the pace.
Thank you, sir. So when you arrived at Flam's, what did you do?
We met Mr. Flam, and he directed me to the dressing room, which we call it. It's just the room outside the embalming room, and he assisted me in moving Tammy from the table over to the cot that I had brought up so that we could transport her back home.
Did you make any observations of Tammy at that point?
Just a quick glance, because I'm concerned as well that this was a sudden death. I understand that she was sick, but somebody that young is usually physically enough to overcome it. But I wasn't there during her convalescence. So
When you say that you understand she was sick, how did you have that understanding?
I talked to Jason and indicated that that's what he was told the same thing, but I actually heard that directly from Chad as well. She was not feeling well. She had a chronic cough. She was sick, yeah.
So your understanding of her sickness was from the information provided by Chad. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you said something a moment ago I'd like you to comment more to the jury on. You said you looked at the body because you were concerned. Can you explain the concern that you had?
Whenever there's somebody who's passed away without the doctors being there to handle that, I'm always really leery of things such as, well, I don't want to have an autopsy. I don't want to drag this thing out. And there were already some red flags that I had encountered prior to her passing away, that just there was a cause of suspicion for me, and that not suspicion, concern. I wanted to find out if she had fallen, if there was anything wrong with Tammy. Flam Funeral Home actually did an excellent job in the embalming process, and I just glanced at her just briefly, checking for any type of broken bones, marks on the face, on the neck, on the arms, on the torso, because she was there, and in the process of moving, we did see her entire body, but I saw absolutely nothing that I could determine. I'm not a medical examiner. I don't know
So in fairness, you found nothing that you thought would be
I
suspicious.
found nothing there that would be suspicious, that would lead to my suspicions, but because of the red flags, it just, something wasn't sitting well with me.
Other than, I don't want to drag it out, I don't want an autopsy, was there anything else causing red flags for you?
The speed of the trial, the speed of the funeral.
Okay.
No,
And eventually you did transport Tammy's body back to Springville.
we did. Jason, William, and myself transferred her all the way back to Springville.
And without stating anything that Jason said, did you have a discussion with Jason about Tammy on the drive back?
I did.
What kinds of things did you bring up and say to Jason in that conversation?
In that conversation, we were both talking about how quickly things were doing it, how quickly things were happening. We both felt there was a feeling of being rushed through this whole process. And I actually turned to Jason and I said, do you think he killed her?
Was that based upon the red flags that you were
That
feeling?
was based on the red flags.
And when you arrived at the funeral home in Springville, did you do anything further with Tammy's body?
Prepared her for the family who were going to come in later Sunday night to dress her or to finish dressing her. Typically, a funeral director will clothe them up to usually for sure to have the underwear on and get the body prepped ready so that they can come in and help dress. I did most of the dressing myself on this because they only wanted really to do the makeup to make sure she looked good.
Did you re-examine her body at the Springville Funeral Home?
I did, just out of curiosity for myself, just to satisfy my curiosity as to was there anything wrong. I saw absolutely nothing wrong.
So there are at least 2 times that you looked at
Yes.
her body.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I don't have any questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wixom. We'll have cross-examination next.
Judge, if I could just have a moment, please.
You may.
Morning, Mr. Schultz.
Morning.
I also have a tendency to talk quick and over talk people.
Sorry.
And it's an affliction I have. So between the two of us, this should be interesting. I'll try to slow down though. You've known Chad's family actually longer than you actually have known Chad. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, no, I've known of Chad, but when I really got to know Chad was when we moved into the ward. That's when I got to know him better.
Okay.
I knew his parents from the same general area of town that we grew up in.
Okay. Okay. And do you recall that you spoke with Officer Mattingly about this case in an interview on February 19th of 2020?
Yes.
Okay. And an Officer Mattingly went over a number of topics, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about each of those
Sure.
if we could. Okay. You mentioned the name Jason William. And Jason William is related, is it Jason William?
Yes. Jason William is the husband of Samantha William, who is the sister of Tammy Daybell.
Okay. And you mentioned something about Jason, and Jason knew Chad fairly well.
I would hope so. Yes, he would been a part of their family forever.
Spoke very highly of Chad,
Correct.
had a very high opinion of Chad. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you as well. You had mentioned in the report You thought Chad was a good guy.
Yes.
Okay. Do you still have that opinion?
Yeah, yes, I think Chad is a good person.
Okay.
All
All right.
never
thank you.
mind.
You mentioned with Officer Mattingly, that Chad had spoke to you a little bit about what happened regarding Tammy. Is that right? About the manner in which she passed away. Is that correct?
Yes, I had that conversation with Chad.
Do you recall telling Officer Mattingly that Chad said Tammy had been sick and had a coughing spasm and he woke up, found her dead?
I'm repeating that from what Chad had told me.
Okay.
Yes.
And you mentioned that Jason William also was aware that Tammy had some medical issues as well. Is that right?
That's what so Jason had indicated to me as well.
During your discussion with Jason, there was a history of some medical problems that Tammy was experiencing. Is that correct?
I don't know if I can confirm that.
Okay. But you talked to Jason about some medical problems, correct?
Yeah, that he had heard from Chad as well.
Okay. Okay. At the time, you told Officer Mattingly that Chad found her dead beside the bed in the morning, that he called Garth to come and help out. Do you recall telling Officer Mattingly that?
Yes.
That Chad said he thought the coroner told him Tammy had an embolism?
Chad told Jason or me?
Told you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chad told me that the coroner said that she had apparently died from an embolism.
And sir, how long have you practiced the occupation that you practiced until your retirement in 2022?
About 12 years.
Okay, so you've had a significant amount of experience in viewing bodies and looking for things that you have a concern about regarding issues relating to people after they've passed. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And you understand, and please let me know that if there ever is an instant where you were to find some problem with a body, whether it was something suspicious or something of a concern, are you under a legal obligation to report that to law enforcement as part of your licensing?
Typically not, because I would, it should have been overlooked already by either the medical examiner, the coroner, or the doctor who was the attending physician.
Okay, so you're
If-
not under any legal obligation to report if you see something suspicious,
No,
but under a moral obligation, you would report something if you found it suspicious, would you not?
Eh, you know what? I don't know if I really would report it or not, because it's already been determined by that attending person
Right.
who knew that.
So
So
what
I
you're
don't know who I'd report it to.
Okay. So when you say that attending person, if someone passes away and there's a physician there, obviously there's no need to do an autopsy. Is that right?
Only if the medical examiner dictates it requires one. A
Okay.
lot of times the family will ask us if we want to have an autopsy done. In that case, they can bypass the medical examiner and have it done, a private autopsy done,
Okay.
just to satisfy their curiosity.
But ultimately, do you understand that a coroner is the one who makes the final decision as to whether or not there's going to be an autopsy?
Yes, because that person will then contact the family.
And it's really the coroner's obligation to go through and look at a body and to make an initial determination as to whether or not there's any foul play or anything of a concern. Would that be fair?
It's a good question, because if you'd have to trust your medical examiner or your coroner.
Right, right. And and you don't know whether or not after they make this examination, if they're under any obligation to report any foul play, do you?
I don't know what they're,
Okay.
I haven't.
But in any event, you took the time because you felt that the funeral was moving along quicker than you would like it to be.
Outside the standard norm, yes.
And when you talked about the standard norm, you mentioned that the standard norm is 3 to 4 days.
typically.
Okay, so what we were looking at is doing this in 2 days, not 3 days, right?
Yes, but there was some talk about wanting maybe to do it on a Monday.
Right.
So that, again, just certain red flags that,
But you don't know if whether or not this was a reaction to grief or whether just someone wanted to just, not, as you expressed it, the hoopla. And what do you mean by the hoopla?
getting things ready for the program, getting things ready for luncheons that need to transpire, doing things that the typical funeral would have to take some time to prepare and get people on board with you.
And in your experience, that could have two facets to it. That could either be a healing process for the family to go through that, right?
That could.
Or on the alternative, that could be an extremely emotional and difficult thing to go through that healing process. And we don't know which one we were dealing with here, right?
We do not.
Right. Okay. And according to what I'm reading in Officer Mattingly's report, you told him Chad said he didn't want to drag this thing out.
Right.
He didn't say he wanted to hide anything, did he?
No, he did not. The only thing he told me was he did not want to drag this thing out.
Okay. Okay. And then you took the time and you took the time to look at the face of Tammy, is that right?
Correct?
You looked at the neck.
Yes.
You didn't see any issues of any kind of trauma or anything that would cause anything of a concern, is that right?
From my limited medical knowledge, no.
Right. And I understand that. You don't have the
Right.
expertise. But if there was a concern, there was no visible concern of any kind of a problem, is that
Right.
right?
That's correct.
And then you looked at her arms as you dressed her, is that right?
Yes.
And you didn't see anything on her arms that would cause you any kind of a concern. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. And nothing on her legs that would cause you to have any concern, right?
Correct.
Okay. And nothing on any other part of her body that would make you draw any concerns for you. Would that be fair?
Correct.
You talked about Chad being a sexton. And a sexton is someone who works in the funeral business. Is that right?
Correct.
And Chad's occupation was part of it was to mow the grounds or take care of the lawn and the grounds area.
That's part of his responsibility. Yes.
And in terms of dealing with the actual grave sites, there wasn't a situation where he would actually hand dig the graves, would he?
Very few hand dig. They have a backhoe.
Right. And you
Right.
anticipated what I say. Nobody uses a shovel anymore to do that.
Correct.
That's from the 1800s.
Whenever. Yeah.
So in essence, what it is someone on your staff would take out a backhoe and use a backhoe to dig up a grave, right?
From the sexton's boss. I mean, or
Yeah, the sexton's boss would do that, or who would do that? Use the backhoe.
who would determine to use the backhoe?
Who would be authorized to use the backhoe when you're doing that as part of this
Well,
process?
it's typically the sexton.
Okay. So Chad might have had some experience with a backhoe, right?
He does.
Okay. Maybe not experience with using a shovel to dig graves though, right?
Correct.
Right. Now, at the time of the service, all of the kids spoke, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, all 5 kids.
Wait, one was on a mission, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, 4 kids.
4 kids.
You're right. When Chad was talking during the funeral, he broke down. He became very emotional.
He did.
Okay, was that something in all of the experience that you've had knowing Chad and his family, did that seem genuine?
Yes, it appeared genuine from my point of view.
And in your point of view is that you've known Chad for a good part of his life, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not his entire life, for that 9 to 10 year period.
And
when we moved into the neighborhood.
you worked with him.
And
for
we
a
worked
long
with
time.
him.
And you had an opportunity, like you said, during the time that you had downtime during other people's funerals, you'd have a chance to get acquainted with each other.
Correct.
So much that you made the opinion that you think Chad's a good guy.
That yes,
Okay,
from 2000 up until 2015,
right,
I had no problems.
right. And then during the actual funeral, you had noticed that Chad and Emma were crying as well.
Yes.
Chad was doing something with his hair. He was emotional that he was tugging on his hair or something, you said?
Okay. Now this, that is part of I just barely got to see the police report maybe about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
There was either a typo or I had maybe I'd given the information talking about Chad. I may have mentioned Chad in the report. It was not Chad in the who was leaning over the casket, and it was his son Garth
Okay.
who was there showing the extreme distress, emotional distress, and
Right.
and Emma was there as well.
Okay. And were you aware that Garth and Tammy were extremely close?
Yes, Tammy was a good mother to all of her children.
She was particularly close with Garth, though. Do you recall?
I don't know if I could answer that she
Okay.
was one way or the other.
Okay.
Can't put a hierarchy to it.
Okay. And I appreciate that.
Okay.
You mentioned somewhere in the report that you thought of Chad as a brother. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
And again, Jason William at the time of the death of Tammy didn't say anything particularly negative about Chad, right?
No, in fact, he defended him with my comment about, do you think he killed her?
Right.
I said, oh no.
Jason shared the same opinion that Chad is someone who's a good person.
Yes, he would never do that.
Okay.
According to him.
And sir, thank you. And I appreciate.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Schultz, to pick up where the defense just left off. Excuse me. Did Jason, in addition to thinking Chad is a good person, express any other thoughts about Chad at that time?
No, the thing that he mentioned was when I made that comment, his direct quote back to me is, "Oh no, not Chad, never."
Have you since had conversations with Jason about this?
Yes,
Are you aware if he holds the same opinion?
he does not hold the same opinion.
And I want to go back to the question that you were asked about your opinion of Chad. You remember that question?
Yes,
And in that question, in your answer, you said effectively, Chad is a good person, but will you please explain to the jury now, what was the but? What were you wanting to say at that point?
well, the but was the red flags that have come up since Tammy was deceased, and the time of the basically the trial, the things that were being said, if you want particulars,
Certainly, if you'd like to share with the jury.
okay. Well, there's obviously the Doomsday type thing that after he left Utah, he got involved in a group. You want to cut me off? What? Oh, sorry. Again, I thought you were raising your hand.
No, sorry.
I had most of this was from Jason, who had conversations with him as well, about a date of the second coming, when that would happen. Also of the catastrophes that would follow: Deer Creek Dam breaking, Utah County being flooded. White tents in a city being developed for the chosen, the elected, the people, and those types of things are what made me have the suspicion when I went up there and found things appeared to be rushed, in my opinion, and that's why those are the red flags that I
you. You were asked a question about the norm of a funeral typically being more than 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days on the average.
And you still felt like this situation was rushed, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Was the fact that the death had occurred on a Saturday and there was a desire to have a funeral or at least a viewing Monday, does that play into the rushed feeling?
It does, because everything's closed on the weekend. You can't get a death certificate. You can't, you got to find, we have to have time to order caskets in. We have to have time for the funeral preparation. It can be done. And in this case, I think it was done by having the funeral on Tuesday, because that gave us one full working day where we could contact the authorities that we needed to get everything in order and ready for the service.
On a Sunday, are you able to contact a newspaper to put in an obituary?
We can put one in, but it's not guaranteed that it will be in the next publication.
Was that part of your concern for the rush?
Yes.
You were asked questions about Chad's ability to use a shovel versus a backhoe.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that, we don't use shovels anymore except for when you're done burying, then you use a little bit of shovel just to kind of flatten out the blot.
Based on your background and experience with Chad, particularly that work background that you already talked about,
Right.
would it be safe to say, was Chad someone who was comfortable around death?
Oh, yeah, he would have to be. And yes, Chad wrote, he's an author. He's written books about death and dying as well. He's not squeamish about anything as far as being around a dead person. Although that must have been traumatic for him to have his wife in that position. But yeah.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I don't have any more questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wixom. Mr. Pryor, that was narrow redirect. Do you have any requests for recross? All right, that final topic, I think, went outside the scope of direct, so you may inquire on that final topic about the books.
We'll judge on the comfortable with death as well.
Yes, that's it.
Being involved in the funeral business, such as you are also comfortable with death and viewing bodies. Is that right?
Correct.
And that goes with part of the occupation. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. And just because someone writes books doesn't necessarily mean, if Chad hadn't had his experience as a sexton, just the fact that someone writes books about topics that make some people uncomfortable doesn't mean that you're necessarily comfortable with death. Would you agree with that?
I'm not really sure. Can you rephrase that?
Sure. Just because someone writes books about topics that make people uncomfortable, does that mean that you're necessarily comfortable with death if you've had no other experience?
I think that would probably have to vary from person to person.
That's fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right, that'll conclude the testimony of Mr. Schultz. Is the state intending to recall him at any point?
Your Honor, the state is not intending to recall him.
Is he under subpoena from the defense?
No, Judge, we don't intend to recall.
All right, you're released from any subpoena. Thank you for appearing and testifying this morning. You can be excused.
Thank you.
You're welcome.